terminated Joe Biden's insane electric vehicle mandate where you were mandated to buy an electric vehicle. You were mandated within just a few years to buy an electric vehicle. How about that? And you know what? They're great, but people don't. Not everybody wants them.
Love how he says electric. President Trump Tuesday night touted his rollback of a Biden-era rule that set electric vehicle targets for auto manufacturers, a rule he says amounts to an EV mandate.
It comes as the House is set to vote this week to undo several Biden-era waivers that permitted California to set strict car emission standards. Congressional Republicans are echoing the president, calling it another mandate to buy electric. What does all this mean for the future of electric vehicles? Albert Gore III, Executive Director of Zero Emission Transportation Association, or ZETA, joins us now. Al, thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was saying earlier, I couldn't have imagined a better moment for you to be here. And I want to jump right into the fact that we are seeing quite a surprise, actually, as it comes to this discussion, with members of the Senate from the Republican side actually jumping in to defend the Inflation Reduction Act. Give us a sense of what you're seeing out there and how that plays into the overall discussion.
Yeah, we've seen, I think, a lot of support for the impact that some of the clean energy credits are having in states and communities around the country. And I think that, with tariffs as a backdrop, it's also, I think, become a little bit more easy to advocate for a more targeted federal investment that has demand signals, is really aimed at moving supply chains out of China and into the United States whenever possible. So, it's taken a little while for that message to come to the surface, but we are, happy to see more support for those sets of policies.
The political changes in the last couple of years are really fascinating. I remember sort of having some criticism of Democratic figures whose response to higher gas prices a couple years back was, well, have you considered getting an electric car? Now we live in a world where President Trump's foremost political advisor and wealthiest supporter is in fact a manufacturer of electric vehicles. We're doing little Tesla demos on the White House lawn. How has that changed? Has that actually engendered any backlash to the whole electric vehicle program amongst liberal-minded people?
Well, I think, Tesla has played an important role in the popularization of electric vehicles over the last decade. It's also driven a lot of economic growth in the states where it's been manufacturing vehicles, selling vehicles, building charging infrastructure. It's crowded in a lot of investment from elsewhere in the private sector through competition, and that's been great. But I think when we think about electric vehicles now, we think about every auto manufacturer. Mm-hmm. And when we think about EV policies, we think about, how does this impact the industry as a whole? And what lessons, can we learn from the last decade about how to set the United States up for success, to be competitive going forward? So not just Tesla, but, Ford, GM, Stellantis, Toyota, they all have EVs on the market now that are compelling, that are being sold across the country. And, there's sort of a social proof effect when your neighbor buys an EV and all of a sudden the politics fade away and you're like, well, tell me a little bit about it. They have a lot of appeal, which is great. But it kind of takes that firsthand experience, I think, particularly with, long time American car brands having offerings in the market. And we're seeing the effects of that now.
Al, you just said it, every automaker in America. And I would say one of the distinctive features about EVs is that we rely on a lot of imports in order to make those electric vehicles. We talk about tariffs every single day here, not surprisingly. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see as the impact of the existing set of tariffs that the president has announced on the EV market writ large?
Well, the whole auto market is hugely affected. And a lot of imports are within North America because that supply chain has been built up under, USMCA, and so impacts are, I think, sometimes doubled or tripled up when you have a part that may start in the United States, go to Mexico, go to China, and then end up in a vehicle assembled in the United States. I think that the EV industry in the United States has had a bit of a head start in making a lot of progress and potentially, insulating itself a bit from the broader impacts of tariffs. It's certainly going to have dramatic impacts when you think about things like rare earth metals and steel and aluminum. But the most American-made car in the United States by, the Cars.com does a study every year, is an EV, and EVs have been at the top of that list for many years because there's been such a push to regionalize supply chains. Also state that, over the last 2 years, 70+% of EVs sold in the United States are assembled in the United States. That's, much higher than the industry average, which is about 50%.
One of the issues I've seen, and there's been a lot of reporting on this, is even when there was the charging stations.
Yeah.
Even when there's a conscious desire to do so, Congress allocating $7.5 billion dollars a few years ago to do this, but what they run into is all of these different regulations around contractors and land use and all of that. There's so much, as a libertarian, this really irks me, regulation that gets in the way of even this. This is something clearly expressed by our federal government, that they want to spend money to do this, and it's still so difficult. That's a huge challenge. And are there conversations to be had about simplifying some of those regulations that make it difficult just to build things in this country?
Federalism is a wonderful system. I think, the system, that program, NEVI, was created really to give a ton of authority to states to design their own programs, to create RFPs, et cetera. As an industry group, we certainly gave a ton of feedback on that process, and a lot of it was received. Nonetheless, still, state DOTs receive funding and are responsible for putting money out. There are, I think, a lot of lessons to be learned there as to, why it took a little bit of more time than expected to get money through that process and actually out putting chargers in the ground.
There were zero built still after 2 years. I don't know if it's updated. Maybe there's some have been built by now, but
there have been a lot built, and there were some built, within the first year for states like Ohio that just moved incredibly quickly.
Right.
Other states took their time, and it wasn't like a red state, blue state thing. It was more just about states trying to customize the RFPs and the program to their state's needs. Now we've seen, funding freeze, and who knows what's going to happen there. But, charging build-out continues rapidly. We're putting over 1,000 chargers in the ground a week across the country. And the thing about fast charging is it really scales up with EV deployment. You can't just go build a fast charging station and let it sit unused. Utilization is really important. So, there's a huge market of companies looking to serve demand for fast charging, and then 80+%, 90% by some measures of charging takes place where people park in the sort of real life experience with EVs.
Still, from a political perspective, it strikes me that permitting reform is an area that maybe Republicans and Democrats can find some common ground on. I assume that everybody wants to get those chargers in the ground as quickly as possible.
No, absolutely. And permitting for chargers is more of a state and local issue. Mm-hmm. You've seen this in like renewable energy. Sometimes there is a role for the federal government to play in terms of providing a framework or draft permit, et cetera, universal permit. But in general, there are companies. I worked at Tesla for a long time. Tesla knows how to build charging stations really quickly and keep them online. But permitting reform overall, I think, is a major issue. We need to make it easier to build things in this country for many different reasons, but including, to build more clean energy, to build more modern infrastructure, and we were really close at the end of last Congress to a permitting reform deal. I think that's a taller order now, but nonetheless, I mean, the issue will remain, I think, front and center until there is a solution.
Mr. Gore, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next up on Rising, a new economic report just released. Find out how Trump's tariff policy is impacting it. Stay tuned.